Hello and welcome, I'm Darcy Bits, and today it is time for another Pauper Commander review, this time for Bloomburrow. Pauper Commander is played with 99 commons in your deck and 1 uncommon creature in your command zone. It does not have to be legendary, and so we get to take a look at some cards that others might overlook. As always, we have to watch out for cards that may look really interesting, but not have enough support in the Pauper format to make work. As a kindred-focused set, Bloomburrow cares about very specific creature types, and because it is this cute animal set, they have decided to go for these sort of underutilized creature types for the most part, which is very cool, but for us is a bit limiting. Most notably, mice and raccoons got a very cool Pauper Commander that just does not currently function. When you limit their card pool to only their color and only commons, there's just not enough creatures of their creature type to matter. So we'll have to keep an eye on Flowerfoot Swordmaster and Brambleguard Veteran for future sets when maybe they will become viable commanders at that time. With all that said, let's jump into the top 10 Bloomburrow Pauper Commanders. Number 10, Mind Whisker. Mind Whisker is a 3-mana, 3/2 rat wizard with at the beginning of your upkeep Surveil 1. They also have Threshold. As long as you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, creatures your opponents control get -1/-0. This card is a Surveil trigger in your command zone that's going to happen automatically every one of your turns. You don't have to go through any hoops to get that effect. Surveiling just 1 a turn is actually really strong. It's the sort of thing that's really easy to overlook, but it's card selection, it's graveyard filling, it's very powerful. Once you get that threshold turned on, it's not a huge effect. It's very nice. It's going to slow down other people and give you time to get your graveyard payoffs set up, but it's not going to win you the game. The best comparison to Mind Whisker is Urg Spawn of Turg, a legendary frog beast, but they are green and black. If you want to be in green and black, Urg is a much better pick. Their power scales based on the number of lands in your graveyard, and you can sacrifice lands to gain life. It's a fantastic card, so keep in mind you really have to be getting value out of blue to make Mind Whisker relevant. Number 9, Wandertail Mentor is a red and green 2-mana 2/2 raccoon bard. Whenever you expend 4, put a +1/+1 counter on Wandertail Mentor. Tap, add red or green. Expend is a new mechanic that simply means when you spend your 4th mana on spells, you get this effect. This means you want to be being mana efficient, and most likely you can't rely on activated abilities as mana sinks because those don't count. Or in general, you want to be spending all of your mana on 1 turn. As a commander, there's a lot of red and green mana dorks in the command zone to choose from. There's Radha Heir to Keld and Ruby Daring Tracker. Radha gives you extra mana, but you can only spend it during combat, and Ruby has this ability where she grows depending on if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Wandertail Mentor is going to grow and keep those stats. Ruby just gets buffed for the turn. Wandertail Mentor could potentially get very big. Now you're tapping them to make mana, to cast your spells, to make them bigger, but as the game goes on, you're going to need that 1 extra mana from Wandertail Mentor less and less. So the play pattern looks like you play them on 2, then on 3, you can tap them to be casting a 4-mana spell immediately. Then you just keep casting those 4-mana spells turn after turn until Wandertail Mentor wants to be attacking, not tapping. Now, if you're more focused on the growing aspect, there's a lot of cards in green-red that can just grow themselves reliably every turn. Expend 4 is a pretty simple hoop to jump through. You're not going to find it too difficult to expend 4 every turn, but it's certainly not guaranteed. Furious Spine Splitter is a 4-mana 3/3 that grows at the end of your turn if you attacked an opponent, and specifically for each opponent you attacked. So if you were able to split up your attacks, you could potentially grow this by 3 counters every turn. It also notably has Trample to make the most of those counters. Halar the Fire Fletcher, on the other hand, is a 3-mana 3/3, which once again has Trample, but grows whenever you cast a spell that was kicked. This is obviously much more specific and niche than just spending 4 mana on spells, but it does give you this very interesting build around if you want a more focused direction for a commander. And when you do jump through that hoop, you're not only getting that counter, you're also going to burn each of your opponents as an added bonus. With all that said, Wandertail Mentor doesn't do one thing better than anybody else, but it does do both of these things very well, making for a very potent, powerful combination. Number 8, Moonstone Harbinger, a 3-mana 1/3 Bat Warrior with Flying and Death Touch. Whenever you gain or lose life during your turn, bats you control get +1/+0 and gain Death Touch until end of turn. This ability triggers only once each turn. So you're not going to be stacking up +1/+0 buffs, but really what we're looking for is to give our whole board Death Touch. This is a Bat Commander, and while we are limited to Pauper, Bat is a type that has been around forever, and we have plenty of options, even only in mono black. Moonstone Harbinger as a 1/3 flying Death Touch is already a very powerful body. That's a very scary stat line. And when you can give your entire board of flyers Death Touch, that's very, very cool. Now, you have to notice this is very much on the offensive. You have to be gaining or losing life on your turn to be able to get this effect, which means you can't be blocking with a bunch of Death Touchers. Still, this means that you're going to be able to be attacking with a bunch of 1/1s that are now 2/1s that your opponent is going to think twice about actually blocking. If all you're looking for is Death Touch in a commander, there are a number of other options. Venom Connoisseur is mono green, it is 2 mana, and it's whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it gains Death Touch. If this is the second time it's resolved, all of your creatures gain Death Touch. Sticking with mono black, you have Gothmog Morgul Lieutenant, a 4-mana 3/3 that has all your creature tokens have Death Touch. Gothmog definitely has the potential of giving your entire board Death Touch if your board is entirely tokens. Lastly, I have to point out Fellhide Petrifier, 3-mana 2/3 Minotaur that gives your other Minotaurs Death Touch. I just think that's funny. There's surprisingly a lot of common Minotaurs, actually. I might build this deck. That's not important right now. We're doing Bloomburrow, sorry. Number 7, Seedglaive Mentor, is a 3-mana red and white 3/2 Mouse Soldier. It has Vigilance and Haste and Valiant. Whenever Seedglaive Mentor becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Once again, we're seeing growing stats. Now, Valiant is a new mechanic, and it means exactly what I just said. It means whenever this becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, do something. In this case, it's gaining a counter. It is worth pointing out this is each turn, not each of your turns. So if you are able to target this on your opponent's turn, you're going to be able to continue to grow this even bigger. This is notably spells or abilities, so even if all you do is equip it with something, this will trigger and get a counter. There's a bunch of cards very similar to this in the set. This one was my pick. It's red and white, so you get some color identity options. It is Vigilance and Haste, so you can really be attacking with this every turn and not have to worry about leaving yourself open. Probably the best comparison that already exists in Pauper Commander is 10th District Legionnaire, a 2-mana red and white 2/2 with Haste. Whenever you cast a spell that targets 10th District Legionnaire, put a +1/+1 counter on 10th District Legionnaire, then scry 1. So this only triggers off of spells, not spells and abilities, but it can happen as many times as you want. If you want to cast 3 spells in the same turn, you are able to give this +3/+3. You're also going to be scrying every time you do that, which is a nice added benefit. As such, I think these both have a lot of space to exist. The Vigilance on Seedglaive Mentor and the fact that it cares about abilities is going to give it an edge in some situations, whereas with the 10th District Legionnaire, some decks are going to very much prefer to be able to cast as many spells as they want in the same turn to trigger its ability. Number 6. Persistent Marshstalker. Persistent Marshstalker is a 2-mana 3/1 Rat Berserker. It's black. It says Persistent Marshstalker gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control. It has Threshold whenever you attack with 1 or more rats. If 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, you may pay 3 mana. If you do, return Persistent Marshstalker from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. This card seems absolutely oppressive. As a rat commander, you are going to be able to get a lot of benefit from going wide with your rats, which is going to feel very, very good. We have a lot of rat support in Pauper, and if we can go wide with those rats, we are going to be able to buff the power of our creature here. Now, it is a 3/1. It is very easy to remove, except for it is also incredibly difficult to remove. If you have Threshold, you're going to be able to bring this back every turn for only 3 mana, immediately attacking. That assumes you have other rats to attack with, but that's the game plan. You want to be doing a go-wide rat deck that can also reliably put a thing in the graveyard here or there. Getting 7 cards in the graveyard probably won't be that difficult, either from rats dying, casting spells, or the occasional mill or surveil. This is going to hit very, very hard, and it's going to be near impossible to permanently deal with because of that Threshold ability. That said, if you wanted to go the Voltron route and give it some equipment, that's not really that practical with this. This is a Voltron that you can't really directly defend, which is actually kind of interesting. You can use instant speed spells or something, but you can't bring this back from the graveyard and equip something to it. It has to survive one round of combat first. So keep that in mind. That both, I think, makes this more interesting, although it does obviously power it down. Number 5, Honored Dray Leader. Honored Dray Leader is a 3-mana green 1/1 squirrel warrior with trample. When Honored Dray Leader enters, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each other squirrel and or food you control. Whenever another squirrel or food you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on Honored Dray Leader. Now this card is going in a very similar direction, but instead of going wide with rats, it's going wide with squirrels, and instead of getting +1/+0, it is getting +1/+1. You also have the slight added benefit of caring about food. I don't know if that's going to be relevant or not, but there's plenty of common squirrels to choose from in Pauper, so you should easily be able to fill out a deck and support the Honored Dray Leader. It also has trample, so you can actually get through even if you're blocked, and it doesn't care whether or not you have a wide board when you play it, or you play more squirrels later. It's still going to grow the same amount. But remember, that is actually a triggered ability on enter. It doesn't enter with counters, it gains them after entering. So there is a window of time when someone could shock this. So it is a bit susceptible to removal to keep in mind. Number 4, Starscape Cleric. Starscape Cleric is a 2-mana black 2/1 bat cleric with offspring 3. It has flying, it has this creature can't block, and whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. Offspring is a new mechanic from the set, which is a form of kicker on creatures. When you cast a creature with offspring, you may pay the offspring kicker, and if you do, you create a token copy of that creature, but it's only a 1/1. As you can imagine, generally speaking, these come with interesting ETBs or interesting static abilities. In the case of Starscape Cleric, we have whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. This is an effect we've seen plenty of times in Magic, but it is always very powerful, and having it in the command zone is very, very cool. If you cast this for 2, it is the cheapest version of this effect that you can find. If you cast it for 5, you're getting double the effect. There are a couple of competitors for this effect that we need to compare it with. Cliffhaven Vampire is a 4-mana white and black 2/4 vampire. It also has flying, which is nice, and otherwise it drains the same way. When you regain life, each opponent loses 1 life. The benefit of Cliffhaven Vampire is that you're getting to use white mana as well in your color identity. Otherwise, it's 4 mana for a bigger body instead of 5 mana for 2 instances of drain. The other option is Dina Soul Steeper, a 2-mana 1/3 with the same text. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life, but then it also has 1 mana sacrifice another creature. Dina gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. I don't know how often that last line is going to be relevant to most decks, so it's not a huge comparison, but just like Cliffhaven Vampire, Dina gives us an extra color to play with. If you're happy with mono black, Starscape Cleric seems like the best pick of the 3, but if you want an extra color to play with, there are other options, and they're really going to help you pad out your ability to gain life consistently with green or white. Number 3, Coruscation Mage. 2-mana 2/2 red otter wizard. They have offspring 2, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. Once again, this is an effect we've seen a million times, but this might be the strongest version of it because of that offspring allowing it to be triggering twice. Cast normally, this is a 2-mana 2/2 that pings, and that is going to be a very cheap option for that effect. But if you invest 2 more mana and make it a 4-mana spell, you're going to get twice that many triggers. The best comparison right now is probably Lambhold Raconteur, which is a 4-mana 2/4 with this ability, but they also have Daybound. If you're able to change it from day to night, they become Lambhold Ravager, which is a 4/4, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you deal 2 damage to each opponent. So instead of having to spend 4 mana to get started and then jump through a hoop to level them up, Coruscation Mage, you can just spend 4 and already be getting 2 pings. That said, you have very weak bodies that can't really do much in combat and will be removed very easily, so you're going to have to keep that in mind. A similar option is another card from the same set, Teapot Slinger, which is a 4-mana 3/4 that when you expend 4, you deal 2 damage to each opponent. This of course means it's not triggering every time you cast a non-creature spell, but it is the first time you hit 4 with any spell, which could potentially be an upside. In that same lane, we have Gutter Snipe as an option, 3-mana 2/2, that whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, deals 2 damage to each opponent. So we're back to 2 damage baseline, but only instant sorceries, not any non-creature spell. That said, usually your non-creature spells are instants and sorceries, especially in a deck like this that wants to be spell slinging and burning, so we'll have to see. Number 2, Stormcatch Mentor is a 2-mana blue and red 1/1 otter wizard. It has haste, it has prowess, and it has instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. This is an effect that has been tried and true across plenty of cards, but having it in the command zone is going to be very, very nice. The best comparisons for commanders that have this same discount effect would be things like Storm Skrillex, which costs a whopping 5 mana for a 2/4 flyer, which is coming down a lot later than this is. Also, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it gets +2/+0, so a much more offensively focused thing instead of having prowess give +1/+1, but only triggers on instants and sorceries. Again, that's not a big deal. You are discounting your instant sorceries, that's what you care about, but that's 5 mana, which is kind of a lot for this sort of effect. Something that's a bit more comparative is Curious Homunculus. Curious Homunculus is only mono blue, but it gives you a 2-mana 1/1 that can tap to add colorless, spent only on instants and sorcery spells. So that's not a discount of 1, but it is 1 extra mana for each of your turns. But moving forward, it says at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 3 or more instants and sorceries in your graveyard, transform this. And when it transforms, it does gain prowess, just like Stormcatch Mentor, and its ability changes from a tap to instants and sorceries you cast cost 1 less. It also now has a baseline 3/4 body. Curious Homunculus looks actually really, really good as a commander, but it is incredibly susceptible to removal, something we have to repeat every single time. There's other ways of getting around that. You can cast spells to protect it. You can equip equipment to it to protect it. But baseline, this is a 1/1 that needs to stick an entire turn cycle before it can evolve into its full final form, whereas Stormcatch Mentor just starts there. Either way though, Stormcatch Mentor is also just a 1/1, but if you can cast 2 spells before the shock resolves, you can buff yourself up to a 3/3 and survive the shock. So it is a bit more resilient than it looks. Before we go to number 1, we have some honorable mentions. Shrike Force is a 3-mana white 1/3 bird knight. It has flying, double strike, vigilance. This is not a build around, this is just a very powerful body. It's efficient, it can fly, it has double strike, it has vigilance. And if you want to Voltron this thing into oblivion, I think it would do an amazing job at holding equipment into battle. It's not fancy, it's just good. Night Fisher is a 5-mana blue 4/5 with flying. It's a bird knight. Whenever another non-token bird you control enters, create a 1/1 blue fish creature token. This is a very cute bird matters deck, and you do have enough birds in mono blue in Pauper to support this. However, 5 mana is a lot. It's coming down late, and it's only giving you a single 1/1 every time you cast a bird. It's not a huge benefit. As much as I like the idea of Night Fisher, ooh, if this was like 4 mana, it's a maybe, but at 5 mana, I don't think it's worth. Heartfire Hero is a 1-mana 1/1 mouse soldier with Valiant. Whenever this becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. When it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. This card I considered very much to be on the main list, but I just went with the Seedglaive Mentor instead. It's basically the same, but it gives you an extra white to play with. Heartfire Hero does have this very interesting added upside of exploding when it dies, which I think gives it a lot of interesting potential. You can grow this and just be a good near Voltron commander, but if it gets removed, you are burning every opponent, and most likely it's going to be a pretty scary stat block by the time it gets removed if you are triggering that Valiant consistently enough. Burrowguard Mentor is a 2-mana green and white star. It has trample, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. This is honorable mentions because we have seen so many of this card. Green-white card that grows per number of creature you control is all over the place as options for Pauper Commander, and I usually rate them quite highly. In fact, I think this might be the strongest one because it comes bundled with Trample. It's just a card we've seen before, and I didn't think there was much new to say about it. If you want to hear more thoughts about green-white cards in this same capacity, go take a look at my Murders at Karlov Manor Pauper Commander review. And finally, number 1, Lily Splash Mentor. This is a 4-mana green and blue 4/4 frog druid with reach. And for 3 mana, exile another target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Activate only as a sorcery. This is an incredible commander for triggering enter the battlefield effects again and again and again. Now, that said, there are some competitors that do very, very similar things that we have to compare it with. If all you're looking for is blinks, Soul Herder is a white and blue spirit. It's a 1/1 that whenever a creature is exiled from the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter, so it's growing. And at the beginning of your end step, you may blink one creature you control. This is triggering once every turn, no additional mana investment required, but it is triggering only once each turn. That said, it is 1 mana cheaper, and it is going to be growing whenever a creature gets exiled, yours or your opponent's. A very powerful card, but it is different colors, so if you really want that green, you're going to have to go for something more like Lily Splash Mentor. The other comparison that fixes the only once per turn restriction is Mist Meadow Witch. This is 2 mana for a 1/1, but is once again blue and white. Mist Meadow Witch, I think, is actually a fantastic card because of the way that you can spend that 4 mana to blink anything you want, whenever you want, instant speed to protect it. It does, however, come back on the end step, which means you can't just spend 4 again to blink it again and again and again. Whereas Lily Splash Mentor can continuously target the same creature for 3 mana if you want to trigger its ETB multiple times in the same turn. All in all, I think Lily Splash Mentor is fantastic addition to this family of cards, and is our first chance to add green to the mix at the cost of losing white. Not to mention that 4/4 body is going to be very good at keeping this as a sticky permanent on the board to allow you to do it again and again. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I've been Darcy Bits. This has been Bloomburrow Pauper Commander Review. Have a good night, everyone. I'll see you next time.